Thank you so much for coming on such short notice. Obviously today, our guest is Scaramucci. Thank you for coming. Former communications director for Donald Trump and now a financier. You joined us last time in 2017, and a lot has changed, I think, in 5 years, to be fair to say. So I think we should probably start quite obvious point of change. You once wrote that Trump's greatest flaw was he's too trusting of other people. And now, and so since then, you've become incredibly and increasingly critical of him. So what changed?
Well, I think it's probably important to provide some context. I saw the world from the eyes of somebody that had grown up in a blue-collar family. So my dad was a crane operator. He was an hourly worker. He was in a union. And it's a funny part of Long Island where most of the unions, in your country, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, the unions are probably tied to the Labor Party. In the United States, the unions were tied to the Democrats. But in the area that I grew up in, they were tied to the Republicans for some weird reason. And so I grew up as a Republican. So when I got on the Trump campaign, and just to remind everybody, he wasn't my first choice. I was with Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin. Wasn't my second choice. I was with Jeb Bush. And then when Mr. Trump convinced me to join the campaign, I went with him to the rural and industrial areas of the United States, and they were blighted. And so I made a lot of mistakes, but the big mistake for me was not seeing how bad the situation had got for the people that I grew up with. And so my dad had a really good working wage. I would describe him as aspirationally working class, and he believed that his kids would someday do very well. The people that I saw in that campaign were economically desperational. So we went from economic aspiration for blue-collar and middle-class people to economic desperation. And so when I made that statement about Mr. Trump, I was hooked into the notion that we needed to fix this problem for these people. And I'm going to embarrass myself and tell you guys that I didn't see the problem because I got very lucky. I went to Tufts, and then I went to London School of Economics, then I went to Harvard Law School, then I worked at Goldman Sachs. I made some independent wealth for myself, and I started to detach myself from the area that I grew up in. If you like Mr. Trump or you don't like Mr. Trump, he saw that, and at that time, I thought he was going to be an answer for those people. So I obviously got that wrong, and when I made that statement, because I remember vividly when I made that statement, he was being attacked by the establishment Republicans. But here's something I would say to you guys. The establishment Republicans were not helping those people. The establishment Democrats were definitely not helping those people. And there was a vacuum of advocacy for those people. Now, he obviously, when he went on to become the president, he ended up doing nothing for those people. And he just started rolling the snowball worse and worse. And you may or may not remember this, but I think when I came here last time, it was probably right after I got fired, which was brutal, by the way. If you're ever having a bad day, you can call me. I can guarantee you it's not a worse day than the one I was having the day that I got fired. I mean, that was absolutely brutal, and I'm happy to take you guys through it if you want to hear it. But just so you're sitting there, wow, man, I'm having a bad day, but then again, Mooch got fired from the White House on July 31st, 2017. It's way worse than the day that I'm having, okay? But, going back to that comment that was specific to, hey, we got to help these people. Nobody seems to want to help these people. And he's trusting people like Reince Priebus and trusting people like Steve Bannon. They clearly have their own agenda. Don't be so trusting of those people. So that was then. When I got into the White House, I knew I wasn't going to last a long period of time because I got hired to be the hatchet man. Remember, he wanted to remove Bannon and Priebus. So I was totally fine with that I think it was going to last 60 days maybe, sure. I didn't think I was going to get thrown out like a carton of milk in the refrigerator. Like the milk lasted longer than I did in the White House. So I didn't think it was going to go that badly. But here's what I would say to you, that there was a level of madness going on and insecurity and instability. And there was a White House official in 2019 that had resigned. He came to see me in my office at Skybridge. And he said to me, Mr. Trump has no executive management skills. As a former cabinet official, Mr. Trump has no executive management skills. And if we get into a crisis, he will have immobilized the executive branch of the government. And then I thought that crisis was actually going to be the Soleimani attack. I don't know if you guys remember that, but we assassinated General Soleimani, the Iranian general. And I thought there was going to be a reaction to that was going to be the crisis. But it wasn't that. It turned out to be COVID-19, where Mr. Trump completely mishandled that crisis, and hundreds of thousands of people unnecessarily died. And then I'll say something really scary, and then you can ask me another question. He almost won the election despite all of that, because in our system, he lost by 7.5 million votes, but he really only lost the election by 40,000 votes because of the way the Electoral College works. And if you looked at the swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, it was a 40,000 vote margin. So, he was very close to winning that election despite all of that stuff that went on.
And I think I was going to ask what were your thoughts about Trump's pandemic response, but I think you answered that quite well. So why do you think more Republicans haven't come out and been critical of him? Because when he lost, your predictions were that they would then turn on him, they would rip him apart, and that hasn't come to be. Is that just their own agendas they're pursuing, or what's going on here?
So, I mean, it's a sad thing, but can I just address the pandemic for 1 second? Because I think this is something that, you guys are, some of you are going to go into politics, and for me, I remember I was running a company. Mr. Trump asked me to go work for him. I got seduced by that. I let my ego and I let my pride make that decision for me, right? So my self-narrative was I was a blue-collar kid, went to Tufts and Harvard, built a successful business. Now I've got the chance to work for the American president. But wait a minute, the American president is batshit crazy, right? And so, okay, now I'm going to do it anyway because my self-narrative is I want to be able to work for the American president. And so I was taking a round peg and trying to force it into a square hole. So I want you to think about that as young people, because that was all pride-driven, that was all ego-driven. And if you are here at Cambridge, you probably have read Greek and Roman tragedy or the classics, and you know when people make pride-based decisions or ego-based decisions, they're colossal mistakes for themselves. And so that was a colossal and in some ways almost completely catastrophic mistake. At the same time that I was doing that, Mr. Trump, was making a different series of mistakes, right? He was so intellectually insecure. He would like the fact, say you were working for him and you went to Cambridge, or I was working for him, I went to Harvard. He was paradoxical about it, right? He would love the fact that you went to this very fancy pants school, but you were subordinate to him and working for him, But then he would hate the fact that you could speak in incomplete sentences and he could not. Do you see what I mean? And so he had this paradox going on in his head. And so when Anthony Fauci, General Mattis, when these guys walked into his office, he was perversely insecure and intellectually insecure. And so he would start the steamroller and just plow over their heads. He would say, I'm smarter than my generals. I'm smarter than my epidemiologists. I mean, it's right there on tape. And so if they told him to go left, he would go right, because he wanted to prove a point to them, well, I'm smarter than you. And I can show you that even though I have a difficulty reading and I can't really read the teleprompter and put sentences together, I'm still smarter than you. You see what I mean? And that's how he made those mistakes. So I want to address that first. And then the second part of the question was?
Yeah, so why do you think more Republicans haven't come out against it?
So that has to do with the lack of courage and lack of fortitude, because here's what happens. You go into one of those meetings, you have your political consultant, you take this guy, Ted Cruz. I mean, can you find a more despicable person than this guy? I mean, this guy's unbelievable. Trump attacks his wife. Trump attacked his father, said he was part of the JFK assassination. And then, Cruz is groveling to Trump. I mean, it's sort of repulsive. I mean, I would rather clean the streets. When Trump attacked my wife on Twitter. I mean, I'm a New Yorker. You're not doing that to a guy like me. I think I called him the fattest president since William Howard Taft on my Twitter. I thought I knew that would bother him because he hates being so fat. And then I hit him a few times about how stupid he is, and then he went nuts, and so he went to attack my wife, which was fine. And then we took the gloves off, and we had a good time fighting. It was a good New York battle. But I just want you to imagine somebody like Ted Cruz, where he allowed himself to get rolled by Trump, okay? Or this guy, Josh Hawley. Have you ever seen this guy with the Heil Hitler sign? And so what happens with these people is they sit with their political consultants, and they don't really want to serve the public. They really just want to serve themselves, and they want to preserve their personal power. So they're like, political consultant, what do I have to do to keep my job? Because I don't really care about principles or care about the policy. I care about what I need to do to keep my job. And they tell them, well, what you need to do is you need to kowtow to Trump because he's got this huge base. And if he endorses you, you're going to be fine. And if he doesn't endorse you, he may weaken you. And you may get primaried from the right. I mean, guys, this guy was insurrecting the American government on the 6th of January, which, by the way, is my birthday, which was sort of ironic, okay? I mean, on my 57th birthday, this guy's trying to blow up the U.S. government, right? And I'm like, fucking guy. But anyway, those guys know better. They all know better. They all tell you privately that they hate him. They all tell you privately that he's a moron and all this other stuff. But then the minute the camera goes on and the lights go on, they start saying this sort of unnatural kowtowing. Now, it's incredibly disingenuous, but what it does do is it prevents Trump from attacking them. Because if they are attacked by Trump, they feel they'll lose his base, and then if they lose his base, they don't think they can stay elected. And so, if you go into politics, or any of you guys go into politics, you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to make a decision of whether or not you're going to act like that, which is basically like a spinning weather vane, or are you going to be a guidepost? Are you going to provide some principle-backed leadership, and are you going to speak truthfully? So you may not like Liz Cheney. Maybe you like Liz Cheney. I don't know if you've focused on her. She's former vice president's daughter. She's in the House of Representatives from her home state. But she stood up to him. And now she's being primaried by some right-wing lunatic, okay? And Trump is sending money out there and advocates out there to try to dislodge her. And she's more of a mainstream person and more normal in my mind. And so there's a radicalism afoot inside the country. And why? Because people are very unhappy. They're disaffecting from the establishment. The political establishment, the medical establishment, the business establishment. They're like, okay, this is not working for me. I've lost my job. I don't have health care. I'm worried about my children. And the political leadership in this country and the business leadership has been indifferent to my plight. And unfortunately, in the United States, it's about 20% of the people. And so they're very susceptible to conspiracy theory. Remember, if you are not doing well, it's sometimes hard to blame yourself. And so you therefore say, okay, it's got to be a conspiracy, or it's got to be something else afoot as to why I'm not doing well. And Trump has totally exploited that. And those politicians that kowtow to him, rather than trying to fix that, they're just riding that wave.
Do you think it's fair to say that the Republican Party is now Trump's party, as many have actually claimed? And in which case, then are you still a Republican?
So I'm still a Republican because I believe we have to reform that party. I think that the party sucks. It is a aging white party now of people that scream anger and invective at the TV, and then they buy like catheters and walkers from Fox News commercial interruptions. I mean, that's the party. It's an aging white party. And so what's happened to that party is they've decided, well, you know what? There are more black and brown people in the country, and that means that there will be black and brown people leading the country because of the plurality of that. And so we don't like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the rules. We no longer need the democracy in its full representation. So if you're black or brown and you live in Atlanta or you live in Georgia, we'll give you one voting booth for 10,000 people. But if you're white living in Georgia, you get one voting booth for 600 people, right? And so Stacey Abrams figured that whole thing out, and she did a number on Trump. I mean, I would like Stacey Abrams. I mean, you guys like professional football here, but I'm a baseball fan. I want Stacey Abrams to run the New York Mets, okay? Can I tell you why? Because she's so well organized, okay, and she's so proficient. Maybe one day, after 50 years, we'll win a World Series, you know? I mean, she's like tremendous, but you got to think of the number she did on the Republican Party, because they beat her in 2018 through voter restrictions, and they changed the laws on the way things were going to work, and so she lost the governorship. So she then marshaled all these resources and got herself incredibly well organized, and you may or may not remember this, but you had black and brown people waiting online for 3 days to vote in the presidential election, which was completely ridiculous and unbelievably unfair. And they beat Trump. Now, Raffensperger, who voted for Trump, and he was the Secretary of State of Georgia, certified the election. Trump, the dishonest son of a bitch that he is, he's on the phone with Raffensperger. He's saying, hey, I just need 12,041 plus one votes. I don't know if you heard the recording, right? I mean, it's totally dishonest, unbelievably illegal, should be going to jail for that. Trump won't go to jail, but we'll talk about that in a second. But why am I bringing all this up? Because the Republicans have completely lost their way. A good entrepreneurial politician would say, wow, we've got to come up with fresh and new ideas so that this party can look like the beautiful and colorful mosaic of the American people, and it can be an aspirational party, and it can have ideas in the party that are open to everybody, irrespective of their sexual orientation, gender, whatever it might be, and they're not doing that. And so, you know, the epilogue there, though, was Stacey Abrams beat Trump, and then Trump is a crybaby, so he didn't go down to Georgia to help those two senatorial candidates, and they beat the pants off the Republicans down there, and they won two senatorial candidates, got in as well, Democrats. And so then what did they do, guys? They went and changed the voting laws again. Everybody follow that in Georgia? And it was so ridiculous that the Major League Baseball said, okay, we're pulling the All-Star game out of Georgia because it's too embarrassing to us, because 60-ish% of our players are super upset about it. And so this is the fight. This is the struggle. There's a struggle going on in the country for the democracy. The struggle going on in the country related to the people that have rejected the establishment. And so if I leave the party as opposed to trying to reform the party and to speak out about the nonsense that I'm describing, then I think it's even going to be worse, because you don't want a one-party system. You guys are studying politics. You have enough cronyism right now and enough crony capitalism and enough dishonesty right now with a two-party system. If you have a one-party system, look at the states that have one-party systems in the United States. They have the highest level of corruption and bribery.
Just to touch on the next election, so then when you're going to be back, so I should ask you now. For 2024, if Trump runs again, you'll support Biden if he runs again like he did last time, right? If it's not,
I'll support anybody but Trump. If any of you guys are running, give me a call. Okay, I'll support anybody but Trump. I'll support the Evian bottle. I mean, whatever we need to do.
What about someone like Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida? What about, is he more palatable to you? Or?
So, you know, I'm not a big fan of meanness. Okay, I know how to fight, don't get me wrong. Someone's fighting with me, I know how to throw a punch. I have no problem. I can throw a physical punch or a verbal punch. I have no problem. I grew up in a neighborhood. But I have a real problem with meanness, okay? And Ron DeSantis is like a mean bully. You ever watch this guy? You ever see how he treats young people? You ever see how he treats people that he doesn't think he's getting his way from? And we have enough of that coming out of people like Donald Trump. We need people that are inspiring, we need people that are aspirational, and we need people that have a kindness in their personalities, you know? I spoke at the Walbrook Club last night, and they had this hat from Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had a weird physical shape, man. His head was like the size of like a pumpkin. I don't know, this hat was like this big, but then he had like a 33-inch chest, but then he had a big belly on him, right? I was looking at this hat, I was like, wow, this guy's head is like gigantic. But there was an amazing quote from Churchill. He had gotten something wrong politically, and he was definitely on the wrong side of it. He had made a really bad decision, he knew it. And one of the opposition leaders was criticizing him, and Churchill looked at him and said, well, the best among us choose not to judge human frailty so harshly. Just want you to think about that for a second. So the best among us choose not to judge human frailty so harshly. We need more leaders like that, where I can speak for myself. I have human frailty. I have weakness. I've made my series of mistakes. You guys wouldn't even have enough time for me to list all my mistakes. But I'm also recognizing that you may have some frailty too. Maybe you guys have made some mistakes in your life. Maybe you haven't, but I think it's going to be hard to go your entire life without making them. And I think we should give each other a little bit of a chance. And a guy like DeSantis, I think, is a complete asshole. Okay, so I will never support him, okay? And moreover, he's decided that he's gonna be like Trump. Okay, we used to have this like Gatorade commercial, like be like Mike, like be like Michael Jordan, okay? So these guys have decided they're gonna be like Trump, okay? Because they're gonna get his base, and they're gonna tack to the center, and they're gonna be way smarter than Trump. But I don't think we need that. I don't think that's the right thing to do. So no, I would not support DeSantis.
I think
or Josh Hawley. I mean, this guy's another loser. I mean, I could go through the list with you. I mean, but these are not good people. Is Kevin McCarthy a good guy? I mean, Kevin McCarthy, I'm embarrassed to tell you, was a friend of mine. I raised money for Kevin McCarthy when he was a younger man. Kevin McCarthy has perverted himself. Okay, I don't mean that sexually. I mean in terms of the way his brain operates, to one singular cause, and that is to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So he'll do anything to become the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Are those the political leaders that you want? Or you want somebody that's going to say to you, okay, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe in, and oh, by the way, if you believe in that with me, vote for me. But if you don't believe in that with me, I'm not changing my point of view, because that's my point of view. Okay, and by the way, if I do change my point of view, that's because the facts have changed in the situation, and that's what smart people do. They change their minds when the facts are changing. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. Kevin, I mean, you don't know what he's going to say at any point in time. And he's the exact same age as me. He looks 500 years old. Do you know why he looks 500 years old? Because he's so dishonest. He doesn't know what he's going to say in the morning pursuant to what's going on. And you don't want to do that. You guys want to stay young forever, right? That's what I want to do. I don't want to do that. You got to be true to yourself.
I'll do one more question, and then we'll open up to you guys to ask some stuff. So, as a former communications director, do you think it's a communication issue for why the disaffected and the people who have had it the hardest have turned to the right rather than to the left?
So that's a really good question, and I would love to have you, like, I think you told me you had Speaker Pelosi here. I would love to hear her answer that question, because when I study American politics, those people voted for, or their grandparents or great-grandparents, they voted for Franklin Roosevelt, or they voted for Lyndon B. Johnson, or they voted for Jack Kennedy. And so why did they turn to the right? And, they turned to the right because of Donald Trump. And by the way, let me point out, they also turned to Bernie Sanders. The Trump base and the Bernie Sanders base is very similar. Moreover, when Bernie Sanders got completely ripped off at the 2016 Democratic Convention, his base, about 50% of them voted for Donald Trump. 17 or 18% didn't vote at all because they were frustrated, so they didn't vote for Secretary Clinton. And she needed about 70% of his base to win the presidency. And so they didn't turn out for her because they have the same grievances. And so Bernie Sanders was actually addressing those grievances from the left. Trump was addressing them from the right. So if you really did like a seismic barometric reading, you would find that Bernie Sanders is probably getting 1/3 of those people and Trump is getting 2/3.
And why do you think that is that split to third?
It just has to do with advocacy. So if Hillary Clinton had said, okay, listen, I understand what's going on here. I understand why you lost your jobs. I understand why there's economic anxiety, and I'm going to help you. Okay, she would have galvanized those people. But something happened to the establishment where they just decided that they were no longer caring about those people. Why, I don't know. I can tell you a quick story. My first campaign stop with Trump, I had just gotten off the Bush campaign because he had dropped out of the race. I was with Trump on his plane. We landed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then I got to see something on the Trump campaign that I never saw on the Bush campaign. You want to know what that was? People, okay, people. Okay, if we got 10 people at a Bush rally, that was like a miracle, and 7 of them were his staff, okay? Trump, we had thousands and thousands of people. And I walked out of the security perimeter, and I walked into the crowd, and I was asking people why they were there. And I'll give you the composite of it. This one guy said to me, well, you know, my dad had a job, he lost his job, but he was 30 years into the factory, so they gave him a pension. I was 12 years into the factory, so that I didn't get a pension, and now I'm working at Lowe's, the home improvement store, and I'm delivering pizza for Domino's Pizza. So I've got 2 jobs, Anthony, but my salary is down by 60%. And Mr. Trump is here because he says he's going to bring the jobs back, and I want to hear him speak. But by the way, you think you're in New Mexico? You're not in New Mexico. New Mexico, okay, that would be Mexico. Because my job went to Mexico, and when we signed NAFTA in like the early 90s, since the signing of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the United States lost 65,000 factories. And so he was telling me a story that was like a composite narrative of what was going on with those people. And so if Hillary Clinton, you pick the candidate, went in there, and by the way, remember this, okay, President Obama stopped Vice President Joe Biden from running in 2016. And if Vice President Joe Biden had ran in 2016 and got the nomination, I think he would have beat Donald Trump. Because when you think about it this way, okay, he beat Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was the incumbent president and had the powers of the presidency. So I do think that there was a lot of things that were going on at that time, and Biden had a better touch point. He had grown up in Scranton, PA, which is where my dad's from. That's a coal mining town. He had a better touch point into those people than any of the other establishment Democrats. So there was a series of things that caused that phenomenon. But here's what happened. Once Trump did it, those other Republicans started to galvanize there, and that's why you have that blue-collar support in the Republican Party where it never was there.
Brilliant. I think we'll open up to audience questions now, so stick your hand up and then we'll try and get a mic to you. I saw the first hand here.
Hello, thanks for coming. There was a rather well kind of publicized interview whilst you were communications director where you used some choice words. I think about Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon. I think you said that you thought it was off the record. What kind of made you think that? And I'm sure you've spoken about this already. And can you maybe talk about some of the implications, the short-term implications and the fallout within the kind of White House of that interview?
It's a really good question. So obviously, look, I'm a kid from Long Island. I'm prone to cursing, and I'm prone to a lot of bawdy commentary. The person that you're talking about, the journalist, actually grew up in the area that I'm from. He was an Italian American, and his father was very close to my dad. So they had worked on the same construction site, and my family knew his family for 50 years. And so I had a good relationship with him and his family. And so when he called me, I was having a casual conversation with him, and I thought the implication was that it was off the record. Now, to his defense, I didn't say, oh, by the way, Christopher, this is off the record, and can you please acknowledge it's off the record? I didn't feel I had to do that because we had a 25-year relationship. And so I said some choice words. They were really fucking funny, to be honest. You can go look it up, okay? And he decided that he was going to go to CNN with it, right? And so he called me the next day and he said, well, this is what you said, and I'm going to CNN with it. And I was like, well, our families have been friends for 50 years. Are you really going to do that to me? Because if you do that to me, I'm going to get fired, okay? Because it's inappropriate what I said. Rahm Emanuel is a good friend of mine. He was, nobody cursed more than Rahm Emanuel, okay? But he got protected by the press because they liked him. If this guy decided he was going to do this to me, I said, okay, listen, you have the opportunity for me where I could help you in this job, or you can go do that. It's very transactional. You'll get me fired. You and I will never talk again. And c'est la vie. And so he went and did it. I got fired. I never once blamed him for that. That's like, you're playing with a scorpion and you get bit by the scorpion and you blame the scorpion. So I never once blamed him. I 100% blamed myself. That was my mistake. But if you think I got fired for that reason, then you don't really know the whole situation, because Trump didn't really care about that. In fact, he was laughing about that, okay, knowing Trump's personality, right? I got fired, and if you ever bring General Kelly here, he'll tell you the reason I got fired. I got fired because I was getting too much attention. I had done the press conference. The press conference went well. I was setting up a protocol inside the White House. I had switched the mechanisms with the press. Not to bore you with this stuff, but I wrote a 4 or 5 page communications plan. Someone from CNN leaked it. If you read through the plan, even David Axelrod, the former campaign manager for Barack Obama, said that's a really good plan. And I was going to switch the service model with the press. All of this stuff Trump did not like from an attention point of view. And if you followed his career, there was a woman that worked with him on The Apprentice. And she was very, very good. And she was 2 years on The Apprentice, was a blonde woman. She was doing very well. And he didn't like it. He fired her. And he replaced her with Ivanka. And so Mike Pompeo said to me, it was like a great line. He said, there's 2 things if Trump says to you, you're in trouble, okay? Number one is you're getting more famous than me. That you got to head for Argentina, hide out in the embassy there, right? Or number 2, who do you think you are? You think you're President Bannon? Do you think you're President Pompeo? That sort of thing. So a couple lessons there. Number 1, I should have said off the record, I should have not trusted somebody that I knew for 25 years. That's the state of Washington. That's the state of the toxicity in the politics. Number 2, if you do get fired from a situation, which absolutely sucks, anybody that tries to pretend otherwise is lying to you, own it. There's no sense in trying to go like this, so it's this person's fault or that person's fault. It's your fault. Own it. But the third thing, and this is the most important thing, and this, you guys, a lot of young people in here should really listen to this. You got to forgive yourself. I don't wake up in the morning and say, wow, I trusted that man. He betrayed my trust. I did something really stupid in the White House. I got myself fired. I don't kick myself in the pants when I wake up in the morning. You have to drop the millstone of regret from your neck in the morning. So maybe you did something stupid last night. I don't know, okay? You're probably all smoking too much pot. We can have that conversation at another time, okay, in a public health and safety conversation. But whatever it is, you got to forgive yourself, okay? You can't sit there and whine about it or opine or play the victim. Don't play the victim in life, and you can't have any self-pity.
I'm interested in finding out a little bit about how you decide which candidates to make contributions to. You've given to Ro Khanna on one end of the spectrum, and then Kelly Loeffler, David Perdue, right before their, I think, January 5th, 2021 runoff elections. So you've really, you've touched the wide, wide spectrum of candidates that you contribute to. I'm curious, what's your approach? What's your strategy? Do you just rely on a donor advisor, or is this, are these the candidates just texting, calling?
So everybody heard that, right? It's a good question. So in Kelly's case, I'm very good friends with her husband. He runs the NICE. We've been friends for 30 years. He asked me to give her a donation to help her. My donation probably hurt her, by the way, because I was anti-Trump at the time, so I'm not necessarily sure if that helped her, but that was a friendship donation. I gave to Secretary Clinton because she was the senator from my area, and I thought she was doing a pretty good job. And you'll find with somebody like me, I'm not super ideological. Believe it or not, Trump had given money to Kamala Harris if you look, you'll see him on our donor file. So I have an eclectic mix of people I give to. Ro Khanna is very pro-crypto. Elizabeth Warren, who I think could be the stupidest, smartest person that I've ever met in my life, okay, that's the person I could never give money to because she's intellectually dishonest, right? Hates the big banks, but then she hates crypto, but crypto could help the people that are underbanked, but she doesn't really understand it. But then it comes down to the fact that some people like me could make a lot of money off the cryptocurrency industry, and she hates rich people for some reason, even though she's rich herself and flies around in a private plane. I mean, it's the most ridiculous, hypocritical stuff, right? So for me, I give money to Ro because he's pro-crypto, and I just gave not a lot of money, but a reasonable amount of money to a pro-cryptocurrency pact because, you guys are gonna run the future, not me. And the future is, the blockchain is gonna run a very large part of the future. And so people like her, have missed the boat, in my opinion. So some of it is business related, and some of it is personality related, and some of it is ideological.
Can I follow up on that?
Yep.
Why did you give to Purdue? He's someone who committed insider trading, well before your contribution.
Okay, so I gave to Purdue again because of a relationship that I had with Kelly's. So it was Purdue and Loeffler. And I think I gave the minimum amount or whatever it was. I think it was $2,000. What did I give?
You maxed out.
What was that, 2,800?
29.50, so 50.
29.50, yeah.
I would imagine it was like back money as well then.
Yeah, well, I didn't give any money to those super PACs, but I gave to both of those people because of my relationship with Kelly's husband.
Okay, so it was all just sort of Wall Street connections.
Correct.
Time for a couple more. At the very back.
Who else did I give to? You seem like you're pretty knowledgeable. I need to hire you. I need to hire you as my accountant because I don't even remember. I didn't even remember giving to them. It's impressive. Very impressed. Yeah.
So you spoke a bit earlier about how a lot of Republicans put aside their principles and like public interest and kind of publicly support Trump to save their jobs. So I was just wondering, do you have hope that that could change and that politicians might become more honest in their principles? And if so, how would that change come about?
Well, I'm counting on you guys. My generation has totally failed letter grade F for American politics. You guys can opine on European politics, but the baby boomer generation got handed this mantle of great leadership, a good post-war architecture to have peace and prosperity. They overspent, they overborrowed, they underdelivered from a promise perspective. They made the thing completely uneven. They widened the wealth gap to the largest point that it's been since like 1910. And so they've been an unmitigated disaster. But your generation, I think, is going to change it. I really do believe that your generation seems more practical and more focused on right versus wrong as opposed to hard left or hard right, I think. And so what will end up happening, in my opinion, is this will exhaust itself out. We've got politicians in our country that are running things that are in their mid-80s. Maxine Waters in her mid-80s. How old's Bernie now, do you know? He's going to live forever, so he's probably in midlife, Bernie, but I think he's like 110 or something like that, right? And so Nancy Pelosi's in her 80s. Joe Biden's about to turn 80. And they're just hanging on for dear life. These guys will never give up power for whatever reason, and then they have this perpetuation machine that's helping them stay in power. I'm sure some of you are Americans, you know what gerrymandering is, but just imagine, are we in a real democracy if the candidates themselves can pick the voters as opposed to the voters picking the candidates? That's what's going on. And so somebody is going to have to reform that. Ultimately, we're going to have to level that playing field if we're going to be a success. And so the bad news is I don't know what will happen. I'm an optimist, so I believe that good people will get involved and flatten it out. Hopefully. I take what's going on in the Ukraine as a very positive sign, though. I think Zelensky, who has flaws, and we all do, and I think he showed up in the Panama Papers, and I know there'll be people that say good and bad things about President Zelensky, but I think his stand against the behavior that's coming out of Russia, I think is eye-opening to people, that you can actually push back and you might be able to put up a very good defense and you might be able to do things that can change the world for the better. And he's got Putin in the corner now, and hopefully he doesn't use nuclear weapons. But my point is that provides me with hope that younger politicians, men and women, can get involved with this thing, and that the electorate will respond to them favorably. I think that the next batch of candidates, like I'm hoping that the next Republican candidate is not from that current batch or the current field. You know, somebody like Charlie Baker from Massachusetts, as an example, is like that. He's very principled, very disciplined, tell you the truth. He has a 70% approval rating. It's primarily a Democratic state, but he's a Republican. You know, I'm hoping that somebody like him could catch fire versus the nonsense that we have now.
I was just wondering, what accounts for evangelicals supporting Trump? Because Trump is, the evangelicals are a powerful base. Why do they go for Trump when he's so contrary to what they hold dear? You know, having affairs and sort of having that sort of lifestyle of indulgence.
So it's a really, really good question. And it's interesting that the straightest-laced person in the Republican Party was Mitt Romney, and they did not vote for him. And so there's a nuance there. The Mormon Church is viewed differently for the evangelical Christians that have an absolute interpretation of the Bible. What happened in Trump's case, in my opinion, is he is a phenomenal liar, but he's also a phenomenal salesman. And so what Trump did was he went to Liberty University, he went to the evangelical community, he went to the National Prayer Conference, he went to CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee. And again, you can like him or dislike him, but he has very good political instincts, and he touched upon all of the things that they like. The other thing he did was, whatever his shortcomings was, the evangelicals are very keen culturally on something that they call born again. So here I am, I'm a sinner, I did all of those things that perhaps are in Trump's background, but I've now, seeking redemption. I'm seeking forgiveness for all those sins. And I think he did a masterful job of doing that. Now, you may remember Jerry Falwell Jr. at Liberty University, who has had his own fall from grace. He was the big champion of Trump. And so what you're going to learn is that there's a lot of hypocrisy, and you guys have read enough Shakespeare. When someone's fronting as ultra-Christian, they're probably way more flawed than just the normal person. You know what I mean? It's like doubt does protest too much, that sort of thing. So they got attracted to him. And you have to remember something about him that I think has changed politics in the United States, is that he is like a verbal car crash. Okay, so he is like, there's an American expression, I don't know if it translates to the UK, but it's called rubbernecking. So if I'm driving on the road and there's a car crash, I'm going to slow down and I'm going to look at the car crash, and it exacerbates traffic. And I don't know if that term is here in the UK, but Donald Trump is like a verbal car crash. And so you rubberneck Trump, like you got the channel on, you see the orange hair, it's all twisted up in the air like a honeycomb, and you look at it and say, okay, he's going to say something ridiculous. I got to sit here and I got to watch it. And as crazy as that is, it's very compelling, whereas somebody who's maybe smarter than him, like a Pompeo, or somebody that's could be more well-read than him, like a Josh Hawley, they are boring to you. Okay, they're like bland pudding, and there he is. He's coming at you with like Tabasco sauce and craziness. And so what you're going to learn, I mean, you know this already, but like in America, these are popularity contests and they are entertainment marketing competitions. They are not hiring decisions. It's not like people are sitting around and said, okay, here are the two resumes and we're on the board of a publicly traded company and we're now going to pick a CEO. How are we going to hire the best CEO? No, it's not that anymore. This is a reality show in full life, and who is going to entertain us. And you got to hope that the person that's capable of entertaining you can actually understand the policies. You see what I mean? But the evangelicals, they wouldn't vote for Romney because he was a Mormon, even though he lived a lifestyle pursuant to their Bible. How's the irony? How about that for irony, right?
I just wanted to go back to what you said about the things maybe you did when you were in the Trump administration and not living in regret. And I just wanted to go back and ask you, do you have any perhaps personal lessons through that you could share with us, maybe even in particular to wise use of language or maybe unwise use of language?
Oh, I mean, look, here's the thing. You're not going to change yourself. And there's an expression that in Italian that translates into English where you can't put into somebody what God left out. And so ultimately, I'm not interested in being somebody that I'm not. And I'm very comfortable in my own skin. And I think that's one of the things I would implore all of you to be, is comfortable in your own skin. And somebody asked me the other night, I was at this BAFTA premiere. One of my friends did a documentary on the President Trump. It was called The Accidental Presidency. He asked me to speak to the group afterwards. And a woman asked me a question similar to yours. She said, what was the highlight and what was the low light of your experience? And believe it or not, no one had ever asked me that before, so I had to think about it. And what I said to her was the low light was getting fired. I clearly made a mistake in my language. I clearly trusted somebody that I shouldn't have trusted. But even if I didn't, and I spoke properly, I wouldn't have gotten into that issue. But I just want you to imagine, I got fired. I got lit up by every late night television show. I got impersonated on Saturday Night Live, although I thought Bill Hader needed more hairspray. That was just my personal opinion. And I got roughed up in the press. And it was very rough on my family. And also, I got tabloided, and my wife and I, my wife probably hates Trump almost as much as Melania hates him. It's like right there. And, we almost got divorced over this whole thing, okay? And so I was able to get back my life, heal my marriage, repair my business. And so the low light was getting fired and suffering all that humbling humiliation. But the highlight was also getting fired. And I didn't understand that at the time, and perhaps the first time I spoke here in this beautiful room, I perhaps didn't understand it even then, but I do now, because it made me more psychologically minded. When you get humbled, you become more aware of your surroundings. You become less arrogant, if you will. You're able to operate, I think, at a higher thinking level, which is more communal and more together. And you also have a capacity to forgive better when you have those types of things happen to you. So my lessons, and I'll sum them up in three things. Okay, number one, I wouldn't change anything. I'm not going to change my language. I'm comfortable in my own skin. Number two, go with the things that are the most important to you. For me, it is the people around me who I love and my family. And I think I detached myself from that due to pride and ego, which I regret. And I'm just offering you that as a cautionary lesson. And then the third thing, which I think is more important than all of those combined, is use your voice for good. And weirdly, the firing gave me a platform, because none of you would have known who I was if I didn't get stupidly fired from the White House. And so then I had this platform, and I was able to use that platform to speak out against Trump. And I was, you guys are probably not aware of this, but I was in the swing states during a pandemic going on local news channels. You remember the blue-collar people in the U.S., they don't watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox. They're watching the local news. Like a guy like my dad would watch the local news because he wanted to see what the weather was. Because he was operating a crane. He wanted to know how cold it was going to be that day or how hot. And he would gauge what he was going to wear and all that other stuff. And I was going on local news in those swing states, hammering that son of a bitch. Now, probably didn't help because he beat himself. That's the irony of this. Okay, so there's should scare you. You have to there's so many indifferent people. Think about 40+% of the American people didn't vote in that election. And think about how important that election was. And so you got to get your voice out there. You got to speak. Those are the lessons.
And it's a brilliant sentiment to end on. So thank you so much, Anthony. For
Okay,
coming this week
Christopher,
to us.
thank you, man. Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice of you guys.